Good afternoon and welcome to Breaking Fast on this Monday in the first week of Passion Tide. Today we're at the Church of Saint Chrysogonus in Rome, in Trastevere. Again, one of the old titular parishes of Rome, one of the original 25 parishes. And dating from the time of Pope Sylvester, so right back to the 3rd century. It, of course, has been rebuilt a couple of times, and the present facade, the present building, is a restoration from the 17th century. But there is, discovered in the 1920s, remnants of the original 3rd century basilica and the house, what is believed to have been the house of Saint Chrysogonus, who of course gives his name and patronage to the church. He was a martyr of Rome, was and still is greatly loved by the people of Rome, and indeed his name of course appears in the canon of the Mass. So we have a video so you can see the church. Now, again, regrettably, our preferred tour guide has not yet done a video of St. Chrysogonus. I imagine he's doing that today. So I shall give some commentary over the video. But we will hear from the Catholic traveller a little bit later on after this video. So here we go. Here is St. Chrysogonus in Rome, Trastevere. So the Basilica of Saint Chrysogonus in Trastevere, near the classical guardhouse of the Vigiles, still preserves under the sanctuary the remains of the dwelling place of the martyr of that name, which dates back to the time of Constantine. Saint Chrysogonus was a Roman military officer and is one of those martyrs, as we said, named in the Roman canon of the Mass. Not much is known about him today, except that he probably suffered at Aquileia in northern Italy around the year 304 AD. He was much venerated by the Greeks and later also in Rome. According to the Passio of Santa Anastasia, Saint Chrysogonus was a Roman official who became her spiritual father. When he was imprisoned under Diocletian, 284 to 305, he continued to guide her spiritually by letters until he was summoned by the emperor at Aquileia, condemned and beheaded. His body was cast into the sea, whence it was recovered and buried by the saintly priest Zoilus, who lived close by in the house of Saints Agape, Chaonia and Irene. In 1907, a subterranean church 20 feet below the present street level was discovered. The walls still retain traces of early frescoes. This possibly was the Roman house of Chrysogonus. The present church was built in such a way that its left aisle corresponds to the left aisle of the old church. The first references to a church here go back to the 5th century and in the Roman councils of 499 and 595. Gregory III, Bishop of Rome from 731 to 741, restored the antique basilica and constructed an adjoining monastery dedicated to Saints Stephen, Lawrence and Chrysogonus to house the Greek monks who had fled Constantinople following the iconoclast controversy. This present church was built over the old one in the 12th century and was restored again in the 17th and 19th centuries. To the right of the church, as we saw at the beginning of the video, is a Romanesque campanile, built in 1124 and restored fairly recently. And it is one of the few in Rome with a dome and spire. The lower basilica, which unfortunately we don't see in this video, and which is reached by a spiral staircase from the sacristy, houses the apse of the original old church and the place where the martyr's shrine had originally been in the middle of the apse wall. On either side of the old apse are rooms known as Pastophoria, service rooms uncommon in the West but normal in Eastern churches. The one on the right-hand side is thought to have been used as diaconium, which functioned roughly as a sacristy, and the other as a protasis, where holy relics were kept. The relics housed at this church include the head and arm of St. Chrysogonus and the arm of St. James the Great under the main altar, plus those of Blessed Anna Maria Tiagi, a Trinitarian tertiary who lived in the building next to the church. Also under the main altar are the relics of San Giovanni di Mata, confessor, and San Michele dei Santi, confessor. San Crisogono was formerly erected into a station by Gregory the Great and has been administered by the Order of the Most Holy Trinity for the ransom of captives, more commonly known as the Trinitarians, since 1847. So there we go. So that is San Crisogono in Rome, today's stational church. Now, this next video I'm going to share with you also comes from Rome, but comes from yesterday's stational church, which of course was St. Peter's, the great basilica. The video is fairly self-explanatory, but some of you may be aware that there has been a lot of commentary over the past week concerning the celebration of Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. A decree which was, we might say, unnotarized in the sense that it had no protocol number. All decrees normally issued by Vatican dicasteries and offices usually have a protocol number, like a reference number. But the document did have a stamp and otherwise seems to have been accepted as being genuine. So the great question was, well, was this a genuine decree or was it not? What was the genuine decree about? The genuine decree was bringing an end to a millennial practice, the practice for millennia of private masses being offered at the 20 or so altars around the Basilica of St. Peter's, and likewise in the altars, at the altars in the crypt underneath St. Peter's in the catacombs. For centuries, priests every morning, early morning, in St. Peter's Basilica have offered and celebrated private masses, which of course in recent years have been masses celebrated for particular groups of visitors and tourists to the Vatican. So that if you had a group of Polish pilgrims, for example, would come with their priest, and he would arrange to say Mass at one of the altars, one of the side altars in the Basilica, and actually for them, of course, he would, as their priest, he would say the Mass in Polish. Likewise, groups from other countries would be able to hear Mass in their own languages. Prior to Vatican II, of course, all the Masses would have been in Latin, but still nonetheless would have been celebrated for particular groups and visiting pilgrims, and likewise homilies and readings would have been given in the relevant and respective languages. Also, too, of course, priests attached to the Curia, working in the Curia, who may not be likewise attached to a parish or one of the churches in the city, would offer their private Mass at one of those side altars on a regular basis, etc. Now, the decree said that from effective after March the 22nd, or from the March to the 22nd, which is today, that a new regime would be in place. There would be no more private masses. Now, I think here it's important, it is made in the video, but it is important to understand that a private mass in the context of a public accessible church like a basilica or cathedral or a shrine church or a parish church, etc. A private mass simply means a mass that is not on the usual schedule. So an extracurricular mass, if you like. You know, when you visit cathedrals, when you visit basilicas, etc., you can read outside or inside somewhere, there will be notices of all the public masses, a schedule, an horarium, as it's known, which will detail, you know, when mass is going to be said publicly that anyone can attend. Private masses are ad hoc masses, extracurricular masses, off the schedule masses that occur as and when necessary for particular groups, visiting priests, etc. This new decree issued last week says that from today, that those off-scheduled masses, those ad hoc masses, those private masses will be non-existent anymore. That the only option for a priest or for priests visiting the basilica is to concelebrate one of the 4 scheduled masses. So they can't say mass privately, they can't say mass for a particular tourist or pilgrim group. They can only join in with one of the 4 scheduled public masses. They also restricted the offering of the traditional Latin Mass to 4 half-hour slots in one chapel, the Clementine Chapel, one chapel in the crypt underneath the high altar in the Basilica. Now, that essentially means that priests wanting to offer the traditional Latin Mass have only 4 time slots to choose from, and only have half an hour in which to offer that Mass in. The Clementine Chapel too can only take about 10 people, which means, of course, that those various traditionalist congregations and orders that pilgrimage to Rome, whereas before they could have, you know, there might be 20, 30, 40, 50 or more of them, especially if there was some conference going on. So whereas before they would be able to use one of the more capacious altars or chapels in the upper basilica, which could accommodate them all. Now that's not going to be possible. They're going to have to restrict themselves to a tiny chapel in the crypt. And as is pointed out in the video, unless you know the basilica well, you're not going to find the Clementine Chapel by yourself. And you're certainly not going to walk past it. You know, you're not going to find it by accident. So anyway, let's return to let's go to the video, because everyone, of course, is eager to know if was the decree an authentic decree, because it didn't seem to be issued by the relevant authorities, for those who have normally control over the schedule of masses in the basilica. And it didn't have a protocol number, so was it real or not? Has the decree been effective or not? Well, here is a video which will let us know. Not that one.
It's the day that supposedly the masses in St. Peter's Basilica are not going to be taking place in the side chapels. There are 20-something side chapels up top that are normally used by priests, groups, in the 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. hour, and as I'm sure you've heard by now, that is being stopped permanently. It's not a COVID thing as of today. So yesterday would be the last day, and so now priests can concelebrate in one chapel in Italian, and I just want to see for my own eyes that that's what's happening, because even though I know it's true, I can't believe it. So Basilica is going to open in a minute. We're going to go in and have a look. Seven o'clock bells are ringing. So normally when we go in at this hour, there'll be lots of priests coming out of the sacristy headed to the side chapels.
though ordinarily there would be a priest saying Mass at every one of those altars, ordinarily, for millennia.
So I was really hoping it wasn't true, that there was something wrong with the paperwork and maybe it was fake, but it's real. So all the altars are closed for Mass except for the choir chapel, where it can be concelebrated in Italian, and then down in the grottos, you can make a reservation to have Mass down there. But the grottos, that's not a place people are just going to wander into accidentally or just stumble upon a Mass serendipitously. You have to know where you're going. So the official argument was that it would preserve the sanctity of the Mass to have it in some controlled chapels rather than how they've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years. But those are very holy Masses, very pious Masses that have been taking place. So I don't understand that argument at all. It's not for tourism, because the church doesn't open for tourists until 9 o'clock. So the 7 a.m. Mass isn't affected by tourists, people taking pictures and all that. And some people are saying, well, this will make it less exclusive because the Masses won't be private. That's because they don't understand the reason or the meaning of private Masses. It just means any Mass outside of the regular Mass schedule. So it doesn't mean it's just a priest alone. It doesn't mean it's a Mass in Latin. It just means that it's any Mass outside of the schedule. So it's a group. You know, some of these Masses have 100 people going to them, so they're not exclusive. If anything, moving the Masses into the grottos, which are hard to find for a normal person, those are going to be more exclusive, because to get down there you need a priest, or you have to be with a group. You can't just wander down there. So that's why this is so bad. That's why this ban is so bad. And people arguing about Vatican II, like you want to be able to celebrate Mass in the vernacular, that's your own language. That's what this is taking away, because now you can only celebrate in Italian in the main basilica. So you can't celebrate in English, Polish, Spanish, German, nothing. Only Italian. So if you're not mad, you should be.
Indeed. Indeed. It is a tragedy. It is absolutely shocking. I just can't really process it. And I thank the Catholic Traveller for making the point of getting up early and going there this morning to see, to check. And it's really, really quite odd for, as he says, for that time of day, there would be a priest at every altar, and more often than not faithful, and as he said, sometimes up to 100 faithful in a chapel hearing Mass. It's really quite bizarre, and you know, this is something that for centuries has been going on. Now some people say, oh well, why not have the concelebrated masses, etc. Well, essentially, so what is the difference between a solo, as it were, celebrant saying Mass and a concelebration with lots of priests saying one Mass? To put it in a nutshell, there are all sorts of arguments, there are all sorts of pros and cons, but to put it in a nutshell, put it like this: what is the purpose of the Mass? What is the Mass? The Mass is the offering by Jesus, our great high priest, of himself on Calvary, the most supreme, sublime act of sacrificial love, the purest, holiest form of worship and praise that can be given to Almighty God, because it is Christ himself. and because it is the sacrifice of Calvary, because it is the Holy Eucharist, because it is the Divine Communion, because it is all those things. If you limit it, constrain it to only a concelebration, essentially you are reducing the number of times that God may be praised in the most supreme, sublime, holiest, sacrificial, loving way that is possible from the perspective of earth. Yes, in the sense of between a concelebrated mass and a private mass, there is no, of course, it's the same sacrament, etc., of course. But the most obvious difference is that by having 5, 10, 15 priests around one altar celebrating one mass, clearly God is robbed from having 15 instances of mass. It's all being, restrained to one act of worship instead of 15 acts of worship. There are lots of other arguments one could give, but essentially, to put it in a nutshell, that is the main difference. Now, bearing in mind that our first duty, our first obligation as Christians is what? To glorify God, to worship God. That's essentially the purpose of creation. Why? Because worship of God is to offer to God that which he gives and that which he is, which is love. Now, the difference between that, say, and the Mass is the fact that in the Mass it is the most sublime and supreme offering of worship that can be given to God, because it is offered by Christ himself. And that means, for centuries across the globe, every priest, properly speaking, would offer the Mass every day himself, which means that God was worshipped and praised with the most supreme and sublime offering of love and worship, hundreds, thousands, millions of times a day, every day. As that wonderful hymn, "The Day Thou Gavest, Lord, Has Ended," says, suggests that the prayer of praise was constant all around the globe. As each hour passed, so more masses would be offered. God, the Holy Trinity, would be worshipped, adored, and praised in the most supreme, sublime way that is possible from earth. In other words, that involves us. By reducing it all to concelebration means that those numerous instances, those numerous acts of worship and occasions of worship are taken away, are gone. In other words, God is not worshipped and adored as much as he could be, with there being fewer masses. I could go on, but anyway, this is really a very disappointing, development. It seems inconceivable. I mean, as the Catholic traveller said, he had to go there to see it for himself. And yeah, it just seems incredible, panning round as he did with the camera, and seeing empty altars. And of course, the other thing is that we know, do we not, from visiting various places, what happens to side altars that are never used. They collect and gather dust. They fall into disrepair. You only have to visit, well, sort of any church pre the 60s, any church that predates the 60s, any Catholic church, anywhere in the world, there would be side altars. And you visit any one of those churches today, and generally speaking, unless it's a place of pilgrimage, or unless it's staffed by traditionalist clergy, only the high altar, not even the high altar, but a kitchen table or a kind, or but not even the high altar is used in most churches, even to this day, nowadays. So all those side altars are just left to rack and ruin. I was gobsmacked once visiting a church not so very far away, not in this city, further down the coast, but visiting a Catholic church, and finding the side altars where the ments, so the consecrated part of the altar, the stone whereupon mass is offered, where underneath the cloths and everything is where the host would rest, and underneath in the altar would be the relics. I remember seeing this place, and clearly they weren't they'd moved the high altar away from the old reredos in the main sanctuary, so it was standalone, and they clearly only ever used that for mass. And in the side chapels, the side altars, every single one, no cloths, no flowers, no candlesticks, maybe a broken crucifix, and then someone somewhen had hacked the consecrated ments, the consecrated altar stone, hacked it so it was in bits, and taken the relics out, and had left it like that. And variously, you go to churches that, in parishes that were at one time may have been staffed by 2, 3, or 4 priests. You'd have a rector, you'd have the parish priest, and you might have 3 or 4 curates. And in the old days, of course, each of them would have said mass. You'd have had the mass for the parish every day, the main mass, and then early in the morning, the other priests would have said their private masses, and those at side altars. The contrast between the past and the present really is quite something. And to think now that those altars in St. Peter's ostensibly are going to become disregarded, obsolete, neglected, uncared for. I mean, pray God that nobody goes around and starts hacking out the relics from inside them. But if they're not regularly being used, the sacristans are not going to go around putting out fresh cloths, putting out fresh flowers, checking the candles, etc. Those side altars are just going to be neglected. But those altars at which priests for centuries, every morning, had offered masses. Just shocking. If you've just joined us, you don't know what I'm talking about, rewind after the show, and you'll find out. Anyway, I won't go on about it. Don't forget, 6 o'clock, Angelus and Rosary, and 6:45 the domestic church, and 10 o'clock tonight our daily examen. It'd be wonderful to see you at either or any or all of those broadcasts following this. God bless the rest of your day. Look after yourselves, take care of others, and remember, as always, God loves you.